if there were a Ukrainian victory, what would what would that involve for us? I mean, because the problem is that the strategic location of Crimea, which has been because of its strategic location, been the home of, most of Russia's advanced firepower, at least naval firepower, for the last 250 years. And losing that it's not just losing a base, it's getting a sworn enemy's base inside of what you think of as your country. What would we have to do to garrison that base? Because if the United States were to bring about a victory for Ukraine, it could not just leave Ukraine alone. It would be a much bigger commitment because of the truth of what Barack Obama said about the proximity to Russia and their caring about us and our ultimately not. It would be, I think it would dwarf our commitment to Korea.
Except let me put this to you as a counter to that, which is that haven't we also in the last 6 months witnessed the reality of a militarily weak Russia? The one thing it seems to have emerged from the last 9 months is the sense that this Russia is not a conventional military threat to Europe. It could not invade Poland even if it wanted to. I mean, it probably does want to, but let's say it's not going to be able to do that against NATO. In fact, NATO has shown itself to be incredibly superior in terms of its technology and long run. Probably Putin's ability to rebuild his military technologically is becoming harder and harder. So you could say, well, we don't. We won. We've weakened Russia, which was the goal. At least some people believe it was. We don't have to do that much for Ukraine. And maybe if the final deal is, okay, we'll agree to cede Crimea, but in return for giving us back the Donbass and some sort of a commitment to not invade anytime soon, that would be tolerable.
Well, the commitment to not invade would be NATO membership. I mean, that would be what would create that.
What about EU membership as a kind of halfway house?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's kind of a halfway house. On the other hand, I like the way certain anti-capitalist radicals think of the EU, which is as a kind of a division of labor with NATO. It's really actually part of the same civilizational defense structure, and that's why the European countries don't pay much money for their defense, because they pay the money to acculturate and economically integrate the new conquests of NATO.
Of Central Europe.
Yeah, in Central Europe. But I agree with you that a lot of this talk that we've heard about, well, if we let Russia, take Ukraine, how do we know he's not going to be on this, walking down the Champs-Élysées tomorrow?
By now he's not.
Yeah, that's right. And it was a rather, small force with which he invaded Kiev. He's got more men there, but I think the key thing that has caused this war to play out very differently than other Russian wars. Russia has lost wars before. I mean, in surprising and humiliating ways, but it's really won some awesome military victories. And one of the things about Russia is that this war is kind of like earlier Russian wars in that they started off disorganized. It's taken them a long time to find out where their strengths are. And as they're doing that, they're kind of like losing very valuable, officers and soldiers and wasting equipment and things like that. But Russians have been able to take a lot of pain in war over the centuries. And they've always had, a couple of weapons in a very picturesque way. They've had the Russian winter, but even if an army is not foolish enough to march to Moscow, Russia's had these vast demographic resources. And if you look at the way they did things in World War II, when they moved all their industrial production, to where It would have taken the German armies a year to reach it, and started bringing in manpower from all over their empire, and it was really decisive. It means that meant that Russia could fight a long war and make up for early mistakes. That manpower is the missing element. The demographic weakness of Russia is extraordinary. I mean, it's one of the, it is one of the weaker demographic countries in terms of birth rate, in terms of, how many children each family is having. It's one of the weaker countries in Europe, which is the most demographically weak area the world has ever known. And I don't think there's ever been a war that's pitted two countries in which it's almost the norm to have a one-child family. And when you're drafting kids from one-child families, it's not that not just that you don't have military replacements. You have a whole cultural factor, because every time someone dies on the battlefield, it's the extinction of a family. And so this is the element of Russia's traditional military strength that's missing.
Yeah, probably fatally.